Hello, everybody, and either good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what time you're watching or listening into our podcast here, the Human Intelligent Dialogue. Happy 2026 for those that I haven't talked to yet. And so, like always, as you know, I'm Edward Marino, the host for this dialogue and this podcast. As you know, I'm always looking for how do we help organizations out there of all sizes and colors and irrespective of where you are in the world. How do you help organizations become more human intelligent in the era of artificial intelligence or AI? As I like to say, we need more HI in the era of AI. And so, as you know, I like to bring in speakers from all different facets, different perspectives. Today, I have the great pleasure of inviting in a colleague of mine, David Miklas, who's going to speak to us from a different angle, maybe more so from an angle you weren't expecting, but I think it's value add for sure. That's why he's here. And that is from a legal perspective and how he's seeing all of that play out into the whole human competency angle and the whole human dynamic of what's taking hold of organizations today. So thank you all for joining us. So David, thank you so much for coming on board here today. I hope happy Monday to you
Thank
today.
you. Thank you.
So
Awesome.
yeah, thanks again for being here. So David, so people get a little sense of who is David. Give us a little background as to how you came to where you are and what you do nowadays.
Sure. So I'm an employment attorney. I own my own employment law firm. This is all I've done for 27 years, ever since I graduated from law school in 1998. I used to work with another group of attorneys, and then I've transitioned. I own my own law firm now, but all I've ever done is represent Florida employers, things like discrimination, harassment, retaliation, wage and hour claims. So I do a lot of litigation, but I also more recently, I found that I actually enjoy going out into workplaces and training employees, especially managers, bringing them up to speed on discrimination and harassment and retaliation and how to avoid getting sued. That's what my goal is.
Cool, cool. Okay, so kind of keep them out of trouble. So based on that, David, so you're out there, as you said, it's not where you're really finding your next purpose in life, for lack of better words, is really getting out there and speaking with managers and helping them be more proactive and understand and learn, hey, here's the laws and these are some of the things you shouldn't be doing and how can you be a better manager at the end of the day? So what, based on that experience in the last, say, 5 years or so for you, what are some of the emerging trends that you're seeing happen out there when it comes to human capital and whole organizational dynamics at play, whether it's small, medium, or large organizations, wherever you may be, irrespective of industry?
Well, obviously, artificial intelligence. Where I'm seeing it, I know there's AI involved in the hiring process, but where I actually see it is where a manager maybe isn't that eloquent, doesn't feel that comfortable writing a flowery letter, and maybe even like a termination letter. And I've actually seen where a manager will write a termination letter. Hey, Bob, we're going to let you go for these three reasons, and identify, three legitimate reasons: tardiness, I don't know, poor performance, and something else. Solid reasons to terminate. But then later on, they use AI to kind of help them beef up the letter. And then at the bottom of the letter, it says, if you need a reference, just ask me. Have a great day. Thanks for all your contributions, which don't really make sense. I mean, if you're firing someone for poor performance, you're not going to be giving them a letter of reference. You're not going to say, yeah, they're a great employee. It's inconsistent. So using AI in that manner really hurts the employer because it undermines what would normally be a defense if they sue for some wrongful termination or something like that. If you let them go for a solid reason, why in the world is your manager willing to give them a good reference?
I got you. Yeah, yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. But let me ask you this: as you look at those companies that maybe they need your help, and you're in there educating them, helping them, consulting to them, whatever, and you see some out there that are doing it well. As you continue to read, to do some comparisons with, hey, this is why these need some help, where these seem to have their act together. What are some solutions that you're seeing in action? What are some strategies that you see that are making a difference for some of those organizations that are doing it well, whether that be a great place to work or they have minimal bad PR because they don't have the lawsuits, they don't have to bring in David from that perspective, they're bringing him in from a proactive perspective, educate our managers and so forth. So what are some solutions and actions and strategies that you see that are making a difference out there?
Well, and that's a really good question. And anyone who's a CFO may not like this, depending on their structure, but not having HR report to the CFO is a big deal. Most CFOs focus on costs, and they view almost anything that HR does as a cost. And this is not the proper way, in my opinion, to view HR. And I think it's better when HR reports directly to the CEO or the president of the company. And that structural piece is something I've seen over and over and over again. The good companies that avoid litigation tend to not be structured for HR to report to the CFO. And one of the immediate things that I see is companies that have HR report to the CFO rarely invest in training, because they view their employees as costs instead of investments. Whereas usually, if the HR has a lot of control, and doesn't have everything tied to the CFO's purse strings, then they can invest in their employees, and they should do regular training. There are states that require harassment training every year or every 2 years. In Florida, we don't. And there are plenty of employers that have never trained their employees on harassment. Some haven't done it in 10 years. This is something that should be regular. Whether you do it every year is debatable, but if you've never done training, something's wrong. And this is the best way to avoid getting dragged into a lawsuit, because the HR is, if they're competent, if they're certified, if they go to regular HR conferences, they tend to know what to do to comply with the law. It's your managers that don't. And if you don't give them the tools to be successful, that's where they're going to have weaknesses. So it's kind of like if you promote a manager from within, but you never teach them how to manage people, they probably aren't going to be a good manager. So I'm a big fan of giving training to managers to help them be successful as a manager.
It's so interesting you say that. I actually backed up into this field in the Air Force. And in the Air Force, I used to do sexual harassment training. I used to do discrimination complaints and so forth. That's how I backed up into the field. Today we call it DE&I. Back then we called it human relations. And it was sort of sad to say that I went to the VA recently, and as I was waiting in line, there was a thing there, a sign there that said, if you've been harassed, this is who you need to reach out to. I thought, isn't that sad? A lifetime ago, I was doing this kind of work. Fast forward 30, 40 years later, there's still the problem right in front of us. Uh,
Yeah.
that's one. The other point you brought up was about those managers that, become managers and you don't train them. I saw that too when I got out of the military. In the military, before you became a supervisor, we sent you off to training. I was part of the facilitators in that era. When I got out in the civilian world, there were many organizations. David's the best lawyer. We're going to make him the next managing partner and boss over the rest of these lawyers without giving them the training. And so, yeah, he may understand the legal side of things, but does he understand the human dynamics and the people side of things as to, I don't do the work now. I got to depend on them to get the job done. How do I motivate them, inspire them? How do I keep them? How do I communicate effectively? All of those kinds of things that in spite of AI, we're still going to need these people skills going forward because it keeps coming out over and over again. So it was so interesting listening to you speak about those things because it is front and center, even more so today.
Right. And a lot of times I pair up with other consultants or HR professionals because I stay in my lane. My lane is legal. So if I'm brought in, I might give a half day training to managers on, discrimination, harassment, retaliation, all that kind of stuff, civility in the workplace. But once it starts getting into leadership skills, executive leadership, or any kind of, tools that they could use, that's not really my strong suit. But there are consultants that is their strong suit, and that's why it's important. I think, like if you're going to have a 1 day training for the whole year, and maybe half of it's legal, but then the other half should be all those touchy feely, soft skill kind of things to help the managers be able to use those soft skills and develop their subordinates. Because as you say, they're not really making the widgets anymore, so they're the ones that need to motivate the other people and make sure that if there's diversity, that we're not having divisiveness in the workforce also.
Yeah, it's funny as you say that because as you say the touchy-feely, it reminds me of the following. If they don't learn the touchy-feely, they're going to be visiting David because of the legal issues that they violated.
Absolutely.
And so because either you intimidated, you created a toxic workplace, people are, work is the fifth cause of death due to stress, type of thing. And for 70% of the workforce, managers is their biggest stressor. So yeah, if they don't take care of that core skill, which is becoming increasingly more important, and it's still got the touchy-feely stuff, well, there's no touchy-feely about it, as you well know.
Edwin, I'm going to give you one little nugget that I do when I do a training. And it's mainly for when a manager supervises hourly, non-exempt employees, but really it applies to everyone, in my opinion. But if someone is hourly and their boss is texting them or emailing them after hours, I mean, we all have one of these. So, the phone dings or vibrates or whatever it does, and employees are drowning in notifications. But when they get one from their boss, they usually feel compelled to read it. And if they're hourly, this is off the clock work essentially. And where I see it as a problem is where someone sues the employer and says, "Yeah, I worked 40 hours, but guess what? My boss kept texting me after hours." And then the boss is like, "Yeah, big deal. It's a one-line response, took him 30 seconds." Well, when I see it, the employee says, "I had to think about that for 24 minutes and then I sent the response." So that's 25 minutes of unpaid time 5 days a week, going back 2 years. And it's usually not just one employee, it's a whole bunch of employees. So we're talking tens of thousands of dollars of unpaid overtime. And this is very simple. Tell your manager, even if they get a great idea at 11 o'clock at night and they want to email it out so they don't forget it, that's fine. There's a feature in the email where you can delay delivery until the next morning, until the employee is on the clock. And that's a very easy technique that I try to help managers start doing so that, first of all, the employees aren't interrupted, at their kid's soccer game or whatever they're doing by their boss, but then also that you don't have liability because it's going to be an unpaid compensation issue.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. So let me ask you this, David. Based on the future of work, you alluded to AI earlier, whether it's AI, remote hybrid work arrangements, the whole workforce psychology you've heard me speak about, and the whole workforce evolution as to where we are today versus where we were in 98 when you first came into this space, type of thing. What are you seeing there from when it comes to the human capital issues and from a legal perspective and anything else?
I'm seeing a trend towards more independent contractors. A lot of workers would prefer flexibility, whether that means working from home, working from the beach. And a lot of times they end up doing that by becoming contractors. Now, it's a very common mistake for businesses just to think, "Oh, okay, I'll make you all 1099s," and poof, you're an independent contractor. And the reality is, many people that are paid with a 1099 are misclassified, and they really should be employees. And there's an actual test that the government uses, and there's different parts of the government that use very slightly different tests. But employers should run it by their employment attorney before, not just their accountant, but their employment attorney before they decide, okay, we're going to make Bob an independent contractor. Because if Bob is really doing the same thing that Susie is doing, especially if Bob comes in the office and works 8 to 5 and you tell them when to take their lunch, they're really both employees. If you want someone to be an independent contractor, there's a whole test. They should have their own company, probably their own website, their own business cards. They should have other clients. So even though, like in Florida, it's legal to have someone sign an independent contractor agreement and a non-compete agreement, it pretty much if you have a contractor sign a non-compete agreement, it usually eviscerates the fact that they're an independent contractor because you want your independent contractors to work for other people. That helps your argument that they really are independent contractors. So people want to have flexibility, and if you can't give it to them as employees, they may find it as an independent contractor. If you want them to be an employee, great. You just probably need to be in tune to the fact that after COVID, a lot of folks want to work from home. They've seen the benefits, and some people can. Not everyone can. I can't go get my oil changed. Some guy that's working from home, he has to come in to change my oil. But by now, we all know what jobs really can be done from home.
Yeah, that's a good point. Very good point. And, something I forgot to mention to a previous question that I need to highlight that you talked about when HR reports to the CFO. I've always made the argument. I am teaching a strategic HR class, and when I speak to execs, I always say, you know what? From an organizational perspective, you should consider finance and HR the two wings of your plane, not one underneath the other. Because if you're using it strategically, not tactically, strategically, no different than finance. And at the end of the day, to your point earlier, it's not an expense, it's an investment. Your folks, that's the one of the most expensive resources you have. And
I like that. Your audience members may think that we coordinated this and you gave me a script, but I had no idea. But I love that the analogy of the plane and the two wings.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, I try to remind people of that. So thank you for this. So let me ask you this as we start to wrap this up, because I like to keep it short and sweet for people. People got 100 things going on, so that's why this is only 30 minutes for them, so they can listen in or on the way into work or however they want to do it when they're doing their exercise. What actionable advice would you give to managers, employees, HR, executives, and so forth overall to keep in mind? If there's that one, two, three thing that you've been seeing over the last 5 years, here's some things for all of you to keep in mind going forward, but particularly managers who, to your point, from executives on to managers who, to your point, they're the ones that are creating the environment, the culture, and so forth, and can have positive or negative impacts depending on how they're doing it.
So, whether you're a manager or whether you're the owner or someone in the C-suite, I think investing in training is really important. And even if you're a manager and you have training available to you, to actually going out and doing it, even if it's a 30-minute webinar or whatever it is, that's an investment in yourself to become a better manager. So that's one key thing. And I think for even managers to going out and actually talking with and interacting with the employees is a big deal. A lot of managers sit in their office in the air conditioning and have a computer in front of them, and they don't really interact anymore. And that really loses touch with what's going on. And sometimes that might mean sitting out in the break room with the non-managers. When you go somewhere, sometimes you'll see like when I have a conference, and if there's all staff involved, all the managers clump together. They all sit together, and everyone else who's not a manager tends to sit with their group or their team. And I always separate them, and I'll say, okay, I'd like you to move over to this table just to kind of separate them, because it's a natural tendency to cling amongst yourself. When I go to legal conferences, all the judges tend to be at the same table, and that's something that I think that hinders a manager's ability to see problems before they otherwise would percolate up top.
David, as you talk about that, I just came up with a term because it is something I've spoken about, and I'm naming it the cafeteria experience. And this is what I mean by that. When I was in high school, I went to Catholic high school in New York. There's a story I shared where we had 750 boys, and about 20 of us were African American or Latino. That was it. I think a couple of Asians. And one day we were in the cafeteria having lunch, and the principal came by and whispered to us, I want you all to mingle around. I'm like, what is he talking about? And when he looked around at the table, I just realized, oh my God, all the Latinos are sitting at the same table. We didn't realize we all just came together. Many years later, I've heard that same experience in corporate America, where people at the cafeteria time is where you see the groups go off into their own world. And so it's interesting that you say when you have your sessions, the managers sit together and the employees sit around versus how do you integrate that, which that says a lot about the organizational culture
I
too.
agree.
So it's just so take that one to the bank with you too, the cafeteria experience, type of thing. So thanks for that, David. So any last words you want to share with the audience before we begin to wrap this up?
I think, I mean, I'm not HR, but I hear it when I go to conferences and I speak at conferences, bringing the H back into HR, bringing the human back into human resources is really important. Interacting with employees, physically keeping the door open. It's one thing to say, yeah, I have an open door policy, but literally keeping that door open maybe 6 hours of the day is a big deal. Now, sure, you might have confidential communications going out for part of it. But if your door is literally closed for the vast majority of the day, you probably don't have a true open door policy.
Yeah, David, as I'm speaking with you, I'm reminded myself of something else. Back a lifetime ago, I created a workshop called Legalities and Realities. And the first morning was all about EEO and affirmative action. We literally had a board game back in the day that existed that we could teach managers about it. In the afternoon, before diversity was the big buzzword, we talked about diversity because we talked about Workforce 2000. So that could tell you how long ago that was, back in the 80s. And we talked about in Workforce 2000, the demographics are going to shift. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we have brought to you right here front and center is David representing the legality side of it. I always come at it from the reality side of it because, as you know, I don't call myself a futurist. I consider myself more of a trends advisor. I look at the trends and put them up as a mirror to you and go, how's your organization addressing it? David happens to bring in that legal side of it because it has implications on that side too. And one of the things we talked about early on before we started here was what's coming down the pipe, David, that you're seeing type of thing. So thank you, David, for your time. If you want to learn more about David, you're going to see his contact information both at the beginning and at the end of this. He and I have shared the stage together when we speak at HR Disrupt, and I look forward to working with him in the future. He's down closer to South Miami, or at least down in that area toward Miami area. I'm up in the Orlando area. But thank you so much, David, for your time. Thank you for your insights. And I look forward to the audiences getting in touch with you. And I appreciate the content and context that you shared for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me again. Bye-bye.
Bye. We're glad that you stopped by to visit. We're in the business of helping organizations in the growing era of AI become more HI, and that is become more of a human intelligent workplace. And we do that in a variety of ways. We can do speaking engagements. I can come in and speak to you either at executive retreats, at offsites, keynotes, things of that nature, to kind of share with you some of the trends that are taking place and what the implications may be for your organization. Sort of in a way, put a mirror up to your organization and say, these are the things that are happening. Are you ready for them? Are you doing something about it? So that's just one way. Another way we do some work with organizations is through executive coaching, helping from VPs to frontline supervisors, those to soon to be in supervisory, high potential individuals, help them in their development. Also do leadership and team development work. And along with that, we use instruments to help organizations from a consulting perspective help themselves, whether it's the Human Intelligent Workplace instrument or questionnaire to take a sense of, hey, how are we doing in this space? Also, organizational change readiness questionnaire. Are you ready for the changes? What are you missing based on some of this information? And lastly, we also look at leader behavior effectiveness questionnaires. How well are your leaders doing? How do they assess themselves? And how are the workforce assessing them too, whether it be 360 or others? So we're here to help, particularly in this ongoing changing era that organizations are facing, a time of uncertainty, a time where the workplace or the workforce is expecting different things. So hopefully you'll reach out to us and let us know how we can help you out. You can look at some of our information that we have out on our website, some of the various podcasts, some of the articles and videos that I've put out there. And hopefully those will percolate and create some thoughts and reflective moments to think about maybe we need to have a discussion with the Human Intelligent Workplace. Thank you very much.